No one crosses those lands in winter by accident, and no one knocks on that door, expecting to survive. When the sound echoed through the cabin, 3 weak knocks, almost swallowed by the wind, that he knew, deep down, that this night would not end like all the others. For years, that door had remained closed to the world, not out of fear, but by choice. The man who lived there had learned early on that the Old West does not reward kindness. Silence was safer, solitude more predictable, and winter just another familiar enemy. But that night, the wind carried something different. It wasn't just cold, it was urgency. The knocking came again, weaker, disordered, as if whoever stood on the other side was losing the fight against their own body. He hesitated, not because he hadn't heard it, but because hearing meant choosing. When he finally opened the door, the cold invaded the cabin. With violence, the fire's flame nearly went out, and there, beneath the snow already covering the ground, stood her. She didn't look dangerous. She didn't look strong. She looked at the edge. Her eyes didn't ask for shelter. They asked for time. She didn't speak right away. She just stood there, trembling, as if any word could be her last. Her clothes were worn, her hands wounded, and there was something in her gaze he knew far too well. Someone who had already lost everything, except the will to keep breathing. The silence between them lasted longer than it should have, but neither of them moved. He didn't know where she came from. She didn't know who he was. Even so, both understood something, without saying a word aloud. If that door closed, there would be no other. And in that moment, there, between the snow and the fire, a silent decision was made. A decision that would change 2 lives and make the past of them both knock on that door. In the days to come, he didn't ask questions. That was the first detail that surprised her. Most men talked too much when they were nervous or curious, but that man, he just stepped aside, giving enough space for her to enter. It wasn't a gesture of welcome, it was a gesture of decision. The door closed behind her with a sharp sound. The wind stayed outside. For a few seconds, neither of them moved. The fire crackled in the fireplace, casting uneven shadows across the cabin walls. She felt her whole body tremble, not just from the cold, but from the effort it took to stay standing. Each breath felt heavier than the last. He noticed. He always noticed. He grabbed a thick blanket and draped it over her shoulders, without touching too much, as if he knew some boundaries shouldn't be crossed with someone already hurt enough by life. "Sit," he said. His voice was low, worn, not overly kind, but not harsh either. She obeyed. As she sat, her body finally gave in a little. Her hands, once stiff, began to shake harder. The warmth of the fire awakened the pain, and with it, memories she had been trying to keep asleep for days. He placed a metal mug in her hands. "Slowly," he warned. "Drink too fast, and you'll pass out." She nodded, lips brushing the hot liquid carefully. The first sip drew a sigh she couldn't hold back. It wasn't just the heat. It was the relief of still being alive. "Did you come alone?" he asked after a long silence. She took her time to answer. "I came alone," she said, "but I didn't start that way." He didn't press. A man who lives long in isolation learns to recognize when a story shouldn't be pulled out, but waited for. He sat across from her, keeping his distance, eyes alert, not curious, watchful, as if he knew this woman carried more than she seemed to. "These lands aren't safe in winter," he said. "Or in summer." She lifted her gaze for the first time since entering. "I know," she replied, "but it was that. Or die where I was." The flames reflected in her eyes, revealing something that made him catch his breath a second longer than he should. Determination, not despair. Not fragility, determination. "Are they looking for you?" he asked. She hesitated. That small pause was answer enough. "How long have you been here?" she asked in return. He raised an eyebrow slightly. "Too long to trust. And long enough to recognize trouble when it walks through my door." She drew a deep breath. "Then you know." "If I knocked—" "It wasn't to ask for help," she said. "It was because I had nowhere else to go." Silence spread across the cabin again. But now it was different. Heavier, more aware. Outside the wind howled, as if trying to warn something. As if winter itself knew that this night wasn't ordinary. That this woman wasn't just a lost traveler. And that this man wasn't just a hermit hiding from the world. He stood slowly. "You can stay until the storm passes," he said. "After, we each go our way." "Door." She nodded, but deep down both knew. Some paths, once they cross, don't allow turning back, and as the snow continued falling outside, their pasts drew closer in silence, patient, waiting for the right moment to knock on the door. The storm lasted all night. The snow pounded against the cabin walls like impatient fingers, and the wind slipped through the cracks, making the wood groan, as if the house itself was protesting what it sheltered inside. She couldn't sleep, even wrapped in the blanket. Her body stayed alert. Every snap of the fire felt like a warning. Every sound outside, a reminder that running didn't mean she was safe. He noticed. Sitting at the table, he cleaned his gun with slow, almost ritualistic movements. Not out of threat, but out of habit, survival, and also memory. "You tremble when the wind shifts," he said without lifting his eyes. "It's not the cold." She closed her eyes for a moment. There were no more forces left to pretend. "When the night gets too quiet, that's when they usually come," she replied. His hand froze for a second. "They, who?" She hesitated, not because she didn't want to speak, but because some truths, when spoken aloud, exist in a way that can't be undone. "Men with badges," she said at last. "But they don't follow the law." The fire snapped loudly, breaking the heavy silence that had settled. He slowly lifted his gaze. In that instant, something changed. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition. "So, you're not running from criminals," he said. "You're running from people protected by a name." She nodded. "They call it justice," she added. "I call it massacre." The word hung in the air. Massacre. He stood and walked to the window, gently pulling aside the makeshift curtain. Outside, only white. But he knew very well, that danger doesn't always arrive with noise. "And what did you do?" "For them to come after you?" he asked without turning around. She got up too, legs still unsteady. "I survived," she said. "I was the only one?" He closed his eyes for a moment. Her answer hit harder than any long confession could. "They burned my house," she continued. "Well, killed my husband, my brothers, neighbors who tried to help. They said it was necessary, that the land needed to be cleansed." Her voice did not falter, but her eyes did. "I saw who gave the order," she added. "When they saw that I saw." He turned. The look he found in her eyes was not pity. It was something more dangerous. "Guilt. Years ago," he said, voice low. "I wore that same badge." Her eyes widened. "You did?" she repeated. "Until I realized some laws are just well-written excuses to kill, without consequences." She took a deep breath, as if gathering pieces she didn't want to put together. "So, you know," she said. "You know how they think, how they hunt." He nodded slowly. "I also know they don't give up," he added, "and that when they find a living witness, they make sure to turn them into an example." Silence returned. But now there was something new between them, a silent alliance, built not on trust, but on scars, too similar to ignore. "If they come," she said, "I won't run again." He walked to the door, hand resting on the thick wood. "Then you'll need to learn to defend yourself," he replied, "because this place has already been forgotten by the world." She swallowed hard. "And you?" she asked. "Will you keep pretending you hid here by choice?" He opened the door just enough to watch the snow fall. "No," he said, "I came here because some wars don't end just because you survive them." The door closed, and in that instant, they both knew the winter had only just begun, but the real cold was coming. The dawn brought no peace. It brought a different kind of silence. Not the usual silence of snow covering everything, a watchful silence, dense, as if the world itself were holding its breath. He sensed it even before opening his eyes. Years on the margins teach things that cannot be explained, only felt. And that old feeling crept back up his spine, slow, familiar, dangerous. He rose slowly, avoiding any unnecessary noise. He walked to the door and crouched, watching the ground, blanketed in white. There, almost invisible to ordinary eyes, a mark, not deep, not careless, but recent. Someone had passed through and knew how to hide their tracks. He closed his eyes for a second. "They found it," he murmured. When he stepped back inside, she was awake, sitting, too alert for someone who should be exhausted. The blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, but her eyes were elsewhere. "Don't tell me," she said before he could speak. "I felt it." He nodded. "They didn't strike," he said. "Not yet." She rose slowly, moving toward the window. She stared at the endless white outside, but her eyes weren't searching for the landscape. They were searching for movement. "They always do this," she said. "They watch first, want us to know we're no longer invisible." He grabbed the rifle leaning against the wall and checked the ammunition. "How many?" he asked. "Enough," she replied. "They never send few when they want someone silenced." The fire still burned low, as if it, too, knew that drawing attention would be a mistake. "You could run," he said, not meeting her eyes. "There's still time." She let out a short laugh. "Without humor." "Run where?" she asked. "Every step I've taken to get here was torn from me by force. I'm done running." He paused. Those words touched something far too deep. "Then you'll have to trust me," he said, "even without knowing who I once was." She stepped closer. "I don't trust what people were," she replied. "I trust what they choose to be when everything is already lost." He raised his gaze. For a moment he forgot the cold, forgot the siege, forgot even the past. "They're not coming to talk," he said. "They're coming to erase." She nodded. "Then we won't beg," she added, "nor negotiate." Outside, a distant snap cut through the silence. "Not breaking wood?" The dry sound of something being stepped on purpose. He walked to the back door. "If you hear gunfire," he said, "don't look back." She held his arm. "And you?" He took a deep breath. "I've stayed alive too long to die without fighting." The wind blew again, lifting the snow like a curtain, and hidden among trees and rocks, eyes watched the cabin that should no longer exist, nor the people inside it, because that morning it wasn't just a woman being hunted. It was a man who had been found. And when past and truth collide, someone always pays the price. The first shot didn't come from the cabin. It came from the woods. Dry, precise, a calculated warning, not to kill. Not yet, just to say we know you're there. She flinched instinctively, but didn't scream, didn't run. She just closed her eyes for a second, like someone recognizing a sound they've heard one too many times before. "They've surrounded us," she whispered. "They always do." He was already moving. He opened the trapdoor hidden beneath the worn rug and pulled out a second rifle, older but well kept. He handed it to her without ceremony. "Do you know how to use it?" he asked. She gripped the weapon firmly. "I learned when there was no one left to protect me." Another shot rang out. Closer now. The cabin's wooden side creaked under the impact. "They're in no rush," he said. "They want to wear us down." She walked to the window, peeking through a tiny gap.
"4," she said.
"Maybe 5. They're testing you." He let out a short, bitter laugh. Tests have always been their favorite part. A crack closer to them made the lantern swing. "They know who you are," she said suddenly. He didn't answer immediately. "They don't know everything," he finally said. "But they know enough not to underestimate me." She turned slowly. "You didn't hide here by chance," she said. "You ran from something big." He took a deep breath. It was too late to lie. "I taught many of them how to track," he confessed, "how to surround, how to wait for the right moment. I believed I was keeping order." Her gaze tightened, but there was no accusation. "Until I realized their order demanded bodies," he continued. "Women, children, entire families. A shot hit the front door. This time it wasn't a warning. When I refused to obey," he said, "I became the next name to be erased." She swallowed hard. "So they didn't come just for me," she said. "They came to finish what they started with you." He nodded. "And if they get in, there will be no negotiation." A heavy silence fell between them, not of fear, but of understanding. "There's a way out the back," he said. A path leading to the ravine. "If you run now," she interrupted him. "No," she said. "No more running." He stared at her. "If you stay, you might not come out alive." She took a step forward. "If I run." "They keep doing this to others." Her voice faltered for a moment. "To other women, other families." A shot tore through the window, shattering the glass into splinters. The waiting was over. "So this is it," he murmured. "Either we survive together, or we die trying to stop them." She raised the weapon. "I didn't knock on that door to ask for help," she said. "I knocked because I needed someone who had lost everything too." Outside, footsteps approached. Low voices, whispered orders. The siege was closing in. He pulled his hat down and unlocked the rifle. "When I say now," he said, "you run to the left." She nodded, but they both knew. No one would leave that morning the same way they entered, because some battles don't choose heroes, they only demand courage. At the exact moment when running seems easier, and when the first of them pushed the door, the Old West reminded once again why silence was never a synonym for peace. "Now!" The word came out low, but firm. She moved the instant she heard it. The first man slammed the door with his shoulder, expecting panic. Found resistance. His warning shot came too fast to be hesitation, too slow to be victory. The bullet hit the wall, sending splinters of wood flying through the air. Her shot came right after. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't beautiful. It was necessary. The man fell backward, his heavy body sinking into the snow, and the silence of a second was broken by shouts and commands coming from the woods. "They weren't expecting this," he said, already in position. "But they'll regroup fast." She trembled. "Not from fear, from reality. I've never shot anyone before," she whispered. He stared at her for a moment. "Neither had I, the first time. Didn't know who I'd become after." Another shot struck the roof. "They're trying to distract you," she said. "They want you." He nodded. "They always did." The movement outside grew more aggressive. Running footsteps. Someone shouted something she couldn't hear, but the tone was clear, impatience. "Listen," he said, gripping her shoulder. "When I clear the way, you run, don't hesitate." "I'm not leaving you," she replied with unexpected firmness. "This isn't a request," he said. "It's the only way you get out alive." She opened her mouth to reply, but the sound of a louder shot cut through the air. Glass, wood, smoke. The impact threw them both to the ground. For a few seconds, everything was chaos. The smell of gunpowder burned her nose. Her ears rang. The world seemed to spin out of place. "You okay?" he asked, forcing himself up. She nodded, dazed. "You're bleeding," she said, pointing. He looked at his side. The bullet wasn't fatal, but it was precise enough to take its toll. "Not the first time," he murmured. But his face said otherwise. Outside, the siege was closing in completely. "They won't stop," she said, her voice trembling. "Even if they kill us, others will come." He pressed his back against the wall, breathing hard. "Then we can't just survive," he said. "We need to leave something they can't erase." She understood. Not immediately, but deeply. "Proof," she said. "Names, faces, places." He pulled a small, time-worn notebook from inside his coat. "It's all here," he revealed. "Every order, every signature. I kept it because, deep down, I knew someone would knock on this door one day." She held the notebook as if it was sacred. "So you were waiting for me," she said in a faint voice. He smiled, tired, "Waiting for courage," he replied. And it arrived that night, in the form of someone who refused to die. A heavy silence settled between the distant shots. "If I don't make it out," he began. "Don't say that," she interrupted. "If I don't make it," he repeated. "You carry this through to the end." Her eyes stung. She promised, nodded, she said, but they both for knew, you and for everyone, no one would leave that morning the same way they entered outside. Because some battles don't choose heroes, they only demand courage. "Don't look back." At the exact moment she hesitated, when running seems easier, just for a second, and when the first of them pushed was enough to etch the Old West reminded once again why silence was never a synonym for peace. Opening the door. He nodded. "Thank you for reminding me why it shouldn't have stayed closed." She ran, and behind her the sound of gunfire filled the cold air of the Old West once more. But this time, it wasn't just death echoing through the snow. It was truth. She ran without feeling her legs. The snow seemed to pull her backward, as if trying to stop every step. The wind struck her face, burning her skin, but she didn't slow down. She couldn't, not now. Behind her, the shots echoed like dry thunder, mixing with the confused screams of men, trying to understand what was happening. This was no longer a simple chase. Something had slipped out of control. And that something was the truth. She clutched the notebook to her chest, as if it were part of her own body. Each name inside weighed more than the cold, more than the fear, more than the pain spreading through her muscles. Then the sound changed. No explosion, no screams, just silence. A silence so deep, it made her heart skip a beat. She stopped, not because she wanted to, but because she felt it. Felt that something had ended, even without seeing it. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not there, not now. If she cried, she would break, and she couldn't break. "You promised," she whispered to herself, resuming the run. "I'll go to the end." Hours later, or maybe days. Time no longer made sense. She reached the canyon. The sky heavy, gray, as if the entire world was in mourning. There, for the first time since that night at the cabin, she fell to her knees. The crying came uncontrolled. It wasn't just for him. It was for everything that had been stolen, for all the doors that never opened, for all the truths buried along with people who never had a choice. She stayed there until her body grew too tired to cry. And then she stood. Something inside her had changed. No more running, no desperation, no improvisation. There was direction. Days later, she arrived at a small town, face covered, notebook hidden, but never unnoticed. She ran without feeling her legs. The snow seemed to pull her backward, as if trying to stop every step. The wind struck her face, burning her skin, but she didn't slow down. She couldn't, not now. Behind her, the shots echoed like dry thunder, mixing with the confused screams of men, trying to understand what was happening. This was no longer a simple chase. Something had slipped out of control, and that something was the truth. She clutched the notebook to her chest, as if it were part of her own body. Each name inside weighed more than the cold, more than the fear, more than the pain spreading through her muscles. Then the sound changed. No explosion, no screams, just silence. A silence so deep, it made her heart skip a beat. She stopped, not because she wanted to, but because she felt it. Felt that something had ended even without seeing it. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. Not there, not now. If she cried, she would break, and she couldn't break. "You promised," she whispered to herself, resuming the run. "I'll go to the end." Hours later, or maybe days. Time no longer made sense. She reached the canyon. The sky heavy, gray, as if the entire world was in mourning. There, for the first time since that night at the cabin, she fell to her knees. The crying came uncontrolled. It wasn't just for him. It was for everything that had been stolen, for all the doors that never opened, for all the truths buried along with people who never had a choice. She stayed there until her body grew too tired to cry. And then she stood. Something inside her had changed. No more running, no desperation, no improvisation. There was direction. Days later, she arrived at a small town, face covered, notebook hidden, but never unnoticed. She was no longer hiding, not because there was no danger, there was more than ever, but because hiding now would mean denying everything she had crossed to get there. The small town no longer felt the same. People spoke too quietly, eyes turned away too quickly, doors closed too early. Truth had that effect. Even before being spoken out loud, it already changed the behavior of everyone around it. The notebook was no longer just paper. It was a threat. "They know you're here," said the woman now walking beside her, keeping a steady pace. "Not officially, but they know." She nodded. "They knew the moment I decided not to disappear," she replied. The building ahead was simple, old, held up more by the appearance of authority than by the honesty it represented. Inside, decisions were signed. Inside, truth usually died before reaching the light. "If you go in there," the woman warned, "there's no turning back." She took a deep breath. "There never was," she said. As she crossed the door, the air felt heavier. Men stopped talking. Papers hung in the air, for seconds too long. Someone cleared his throat. Another looked away. She felt it. Felt the weight of every step that had brought her there. Felt the cabin. Felt the snow. Felt the echo of gunshots, living in her memory. "Can I help you?" asked a man behind a desk too wide to be honest. She placed the notebook on the wood. The sound was dry, final. "You can," she replied. "You can start by reading." The silence that followed was no surprise. It was fear. The man opened the notebook with tense fingers. As he moved through the pages, the color drained from his face. Names too well known, dates that should never have existed, signatures that held empires in place. "This is a serious accusation," he said, trying to regain control. "Do you know what you're doing?" She leaned slightly forward. "I know exactly," she replied. "I'm finishing something that started before me." "Who else has seen this?" he asked, too quietly to be casual. She smiled, not from joy, but from certainty. Enough people. Outside, hurried footsteps echoed. Raised voices. The entire town seemed to hold its breath. "You have no idea what you're about to cause," the man said, now without any mask left. She thought of him, the man from the cabin, the silence he chose for years, the price he paid when he finally opened the door. "I do," she answered, and I accept it. Hours later, as the sun began to fall, the news traveled faster than any horse. Investigations, suspensions, orders revoked, but also threats. That night, alone once more, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace, mixed with alertness. She knew it didn't end there. Truths too large never end quickly. She opened the window and let the wind in. I didn't stop, she whispered. I continued. Somewhere, far from that town, men were reorganizing. Some wanted revenge, others silence. And in the middle of it all, a name began to surface. The morning came slowly. Without hurry, there were no gunshots, no screams, no knocks on the door. And that, more than any threat, said everything. She was sitting at the table when the first bell rang in the center of town. It wasn't celebration. It was a warning. Too many people gathering. Too early. Voices spreading too fast. The truth had awakened before the sun. She stepped out, without hiding her face. Each step on the wooden streets echoed, with a different weight now. People recognized her, some with silent respect, others with fear, others with guilt. No one said a word. It wasn't necessary anymore. At the building's door, men were waiting, not with guns drawn, but with decisions made. Orders, one of them said. Official orders. She nodded. I know, she replied. I've been waiting for them too. Inside, the names were no longer a secret. Documents lay on the table, broken seals, authorities sidelined, others trying to save themselves. The man who kept all this, someone said, is dead. She closed her eyes for a moment, not because she didn't know, but because now it was too real to ignore. He died when he decided not to hide anymore, she replied, and it wasn't in vain. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was final. Hours later, when everything that needed to be said had been said, she left alone. The wind felt lighter, the town strangely quiet. She walked to the station, not to escape, but to move forward. In her simple suitcase, few clothes, no luxury, only the essentials, and the weight of a story that was no longer hers alone. Before boarding the train, she looked back one last time, not searching for anyone, but honoring. You opened the door, she whispered. I kept it open. The train began to move, and with it, something changed forever. The lands to the north never were the same again. Some scars remained. Others began to heal. Stories came to light. People were held accountable. Others tried to erase traces too late. And her name didn't become a legend. It became a reference. They said that on winter nights, when the wind slammed too hard against the doors of houses, some remembered the story of a woman who didn't ask for shelter. She asked for time, and of a man who spent years in silence until he chose to stay, because the Old West was never about who fires first. It was always about who, in the face of fear, chooses not to close the door. And so, on that frontier, between the past and the future, something greater than revenge, greater than pain, was born. A path. And whoever had the courage to follow it would never truly be alone.